Mr. Mahdev.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, as I rise in support of this year's budget speech, allow me first to record my thanks to all the translators who are working so hard over these next few days, and record my thanks as well to the Tamil translators in particular, led by Mr. Palaniyappan for preparing with the Tamil Language Council a very useful glossary of English to Tamil transliterated words or translated words. Now, anything I say from this point onwards, which is in Tamil, that sounds intelligent, is thanks to them. Anything which I may say which does not sound sensible is my fault alone. Having said this, it is only fitting, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that I begin my speech with a few words in the longest surviving classical language in the world, an official vernacular in Singapore, and my mother tongue, Tamil. நாடாளுமன்ற நாயகரே, சென்ற வாரம் நிதி அமைச்சர் ஹெங்ஸ்வி கியட் ஆற்றிய உரை பாராட்டுக்குரியதாகும். அவ்வுரை எனக்கு மகாகவி மகாமுனிவர் திருவள்ளுவரின் அற்புத குரல் ஒன்றை நினைவூட்டுகிறது. அதாவது, ஆற்றுவரார் ஆற்றால் இகழாமை, போற்றுவார் போற்றலால் எல்லாம் தலை. இந்த ஆண்டு வரவு செலவு திட்டத்தை பொறுத்தவரை நமது மதிப்புக்குரிய முதியோரை கைவிடக்கூடாது என்பதாகும். அவர்களின் தர்ம சங்கடங்களை நாம் நன்கு உணர வேண்டும். முக்கியமாக அவர்களின் கனவுகளை நாம் மறக்கக்கூடாது. அவர்களின் வேண்டுகோள்களை நாம் மறக்கக்கூடாது என்பதாகும். இந்த முறையில் வரவு செலவு திட்டம் முதியோர்களின் வேண்டுகோள்களை நிறைவேற்ற ஓர் ஊன்றுகோலாக அமைந்திருக்கிறது. நமது சிங்கை நாட்டு சமூகத்தில் இந்த திட்டம் ஒவ்வொரு சிங்கப்பூரரும் அறம் செய்ய விரும்ப வேண்டும் என்று நினைவூட்டுகிறது. கொடையுணர்வையும் ஊக்குவிக்கும் என்று நான் நம்புகிறேன். இந்த வரவு செலவு திட்டம் மூலமாக முக்கிய அடிப்படை கொள்கைகள் இவ்வாண்டுக்கு மட்டுமல்ல, ஆலமரம் போல் நமது சமுதாயத்தில் வேரூன்றி நீடித்து நிலைத்திருக்கும் என்று நான் நம்புகிறேன். பாதுகாப்பான நிதி வளம் மிக்க எதிர்காலத்தில் நம்மை பேணி காக்கும். நமது முதியோர்களின், அதாவது நமது குருக்களை அது காப்பாற்றும். இப்பொழுது நான் ஆங்கில மொழியில் தொடர்கிறேன். Mr. Deputy Speaker, among other things, Minister Heng has asked the government to accept an integrated plan, one that could pull together resources and pool efforts across stakeholders. I'm delighted, for example, that senior care services will now be led by one single ministry, the Ministry of Health, to enable the services to be planned and delivered holistically. An eminently sensible first step, Mr. Deputy Speaker, as those of us who are caregivers to elderly parents and relatives will acknowledge. Let me share a personal experience, if I may, about the role of caretakers of the elderly, which extends beyond the medical or palliative care alone. I'm one such caregiver to a grandaunt and a granduncle. The caregiver, or the face of a caregiver, is usually seen through a child. But increasingly, given that 1 in 4 Singaporeans by the year 2030, as we know, is going to be above the age of 65, and soon many of us will not just have elderly parents or grandparents, we will also have extended family who deserve and need urgent medical care, yes, but increasingly financial assistance. One such example in my case is with my grandaunt and granduncle. They're fortunate because there are quite few family members around, but they don't have children of their own. So they turn to family members who don't live with them. They've got an extremely good town council, a mature HDB estate where they live. They have an MP whom they greatly respect and admire, whom I shall not name in case I'm playing favorites. But what I will say is that after numerous visits to the HDB office to talk about how to talk about reverse mortgages and a sellback package that is both financially beneficial for them in the next years before them, in their twilight years, they're both above the age of 85. There is one question that breaks the heart, and that question is when they ask a nephew, or a grandnephew in this case, what happens if I live beyond the 15 years that has been promised in my last lease that I can take? It is especially hard and tough to swallow because this is the third house they've gone through because of right sizing. They haven't planned, or as an example, they hadn't planned for their financial retirement. So every time they needed money, the one asset that they would use would be the one that's over their head. So you sell your house and you use the income that you have for the next few years before you. How many Singaporeans may be in the same boat but may not have the same kind of member of parliament who would sit down with them and explain to them what they could do, or may not have family members who are either legally trained or professionally trained who can guide them over their next steps? This is a question that troubles me, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I think it's something that we should be thinking about. As we look at the next steps beyond our elderly, and I firmly believe and I support the welfare-centric budget that Minister Heng has put before us. But I do think, and I will speak about this in a moment, that we have to spend more time communicating the importance of such a budget to Singaporeans. When I speak to my fellow Singaporean friends, colleagues, a question that has emerged with this year's budget speech and that has been repeated time and time again is, why are we tightening the purse strings now? This is a natural question, Mr. Deputy Speaker, because we've done so remarkably well this financial year. And I must record my thanks at this point to beyond everyone else, Jurong Town Corporation and MAS. Yes, it may be one-off. It may not ever happen again. But the question still comes, when we're not combating a deficit, why are we tightening the purse strings? Is it because we fear our small and open economy is vulnerable to fluctuations in the global economy and financial markets? Of course it is. But this is not new to us. We are accustomed to Singapore and its limitations as a low-lying, small island state. What stands out to me in this budget that Minister Heng has put before us is that it doesn't seem to be driven only by fears, and this I celebrate. On the contrary, there is a savvy inherent in his proposed measures. Minister Heng suggests, for example, that government ministries, much like private enterprises, will need to look for more productive and innovative ways to run their own agencies. Simply put, they should adopt a corporate work ethic. He doesn't use these words, but it's inherent in the budget speech. That there should be this corporate work ethic and innovation that should be infused within government-owned infrastructure companies, for example, government agencies, to ensure very much with infrastructure companies, very much like how private companies fund acquisition and expansion, so should our stat boards and infrastructure companies. Mr. Deputy Speaker, many professionals and business persons will see the merit of Mr. Heng's financial plan and may actually welcome it. But I do ask this, how will this message be communicated from this point onwards to the non-professionals, to the non-business people, to people who, everyday Singaporeans, who will have to deal with the direct taxation that will be coming in 2021 to 2025? Beyond adopting a corporate culture, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the government has a solemn responsibility to explain in plain and practical terms how these taxes tomorrow will benefit us, our elderly, and our children in further time to come. The government may wish to explain why Singaporeans should go from maintaining their own parents alone, which is their current social and legal compact, to assisting with the maintenance of the nation's elderly as a whole. The government should explain whether Singapore will continue to be a livable city if we're consistently ranked amongst the most expensive cities in the world. Is there a real likelihood, many have asked me, on the current projections as to whether the GST could be further raised beyond 2021 if, despite prudent spending and the save and borrow scheme and policy that we have for infrastructure projects, new gaps emerge? If there are new gaps, will the government then think about revising upwards the current GST, as an example? If the answer is, which I imagine it should be, well, yes, it will be reviewed from time to time. The recurrent question that Singaporeans will ask is, and they'll ask it now, is why not rely a little more heavily, not completely, but a little more heavily on the net investment returns contributions? Why can't they be increased to finance our needs? This will come back again and again, every time there's an increase in GST and any other tax. Alternatively, they will ask, shouldn't we have more progressive wealth taxes? So the best way to deal with this now, when we are planning for 2021, is to speak to Singaporeans at this point. In all honesty, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the questions and clarifications that I'm raising, while directed at Minister Heng and the Ministry of Finance, really are to the government as a whole, because they warrant a broader conversation. Singaporeans' concerns over public expenditure are real, and they need to be heard, if possible, so that they can be addressed. They need to be heard in a context where this message can be unpacked. And I say unpacked because I enjoyed the healthy debate that we had today, the clarification over inequality, inequity. That is interesting to me, but that's because I'm an academic, Mr. Deputy Speaker. That's because I'm legally trained. And that's because of the people who spoke. I know from my own experience that two of them are expert junior college debaters, and one is a really good lawyer. That is their instinct, Mr. Deputy Speaker. But what about every other Singaporean? Minister Heng mentioned in his speech that our Singapore conversation in 2011 or 2012, if I remember, gave him a window into what Singaporeans were thinking at that time. It gave him a unique opportunity, in his words, to converse with Singaporeans about their aspirations for themselves and for Singapore. As a member of that committee, together with many other people in this House, I would affirm the value of the OSC as a participatory process. And I would ask the government to take measures to ensure that new dialogues could signal some semblance of participatory budgeting. These conversations would perhaps be by the ministries individually with groups that have relevant concerns. Where persons, Singaporeans, are given a sense that their views matter and could one day help determine how public finances are spent and how budgets are implemented. Where it is made plain that welfare-centric expenditure tracks demographic trends. We've heard this, and I believe it to be true, as I'm experiencing it as a caregiver. But this has to be explained to people who may not have the same burdens or the same considerations on their mind all the time. Beginning with the needy aged. So that's the first demographic trend that we've all agreed upon. But in time to come, I'm sure there will be other demographic trends which require our welfare-centric concern. Singaporeans are not fully accustomed to responding to these welfare-centric trends, and we should take the time to explain the importance of doing so. Traditionally, Mr. Deputy Speaker, socio-economic issues have fallen solely within the remit of the government and at some times to civil society. But going beyond this, surely our corporate citizens also have a role to play, and they should be giving back in some way or the other. Just as Singaporeans are asked to give back to society, I therefore welcome initiatives that encourage corporate giving. But I would ask that beyond the business and IPC partnership scheme, the ministry would consider a national action plan on corporate social responsibility. To prosper over time, corporations should not only deliver financial performance, but should also see how they could make a positive societal contribution. Just as the public service in Singapore is being encouraged to adopt, as I mentioned earlier, a corporate ethic and culture to do well, corporations too should be encouraged, Mr. Deputy Speaker, or perhaps even required to adopt the core culture of the public service, that is, an unstinting commitment to do good in the public interest. Finally, Mr. Deputy Speaker, as we look forward to the next generation of this nation's political leadership, Singaporeans want to be in safe hands, to be led by a team, by people whom they can trust to understand the financial opportunities, brace for the headwinds that may lie ahead, but above all, who have Singaporeans' welfare and contentment chief in their minds and in their hearts. I support the budget, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
We also want to thank the Tamil interpreter for helping to translate what you said earlier.
Of course.